discouraging. What I should have done was I should have rewound the clock and said, how did he get there? And instead of just admiring him at his peak, look at the distance he traveled. And I mean, Martin Luther King Jr. had many extraordinary gifts, but the stage presence you see there was hard-earned. He started entering public speaking competitions when he was 15 years old. This was 2 decades of work, and by the time he's 34, that year alone, he gave over 350 speeches. That is a speech a day. And both the deliberate practice that went into that, but also the growth that must have come out of experimenting and improvising and iterating is enormous. And so I think that, yes, I want to demystify the process behind those kinds of achievements because it makes them seem a lot more palatable, and it also shows us the steps that we can take to travel, some distance ourselves, even if that's not the destination we're trying to reach.
And it's possible, it seems, in areas where I didn't even think it was possible. I mean, so some of my presumptions were really modified by reading this book. So some of the research...
Yeah, are you saying you thought again, Rufus?
I am.
How dare you?
Yeah, no,
I hate that.
As hard as I try to protect my priors, in particular, like, one example was the research on chess, which I'd always thought that chess was an example of a skill that really leaned on innate intelligence, right? That innate math skills, spatial math, was in my mind in the category of something that was more genetically determined than maybe some other skills. But you write that intelligence turns out to be, quote, nearly irrelevant in predicting the performance of adults and advanced chess players. The early advantages of cognitive skills dissipate over time. It takes an average of 20,000 hours of play to become a chess master, 30,000 to become a grandmaster. This requires proactivity, discipline, and determination. You probably had encountered a lot of this research before writing the book, but did the process of writing the book move you further in the direction of concluding that raw intelligence may be overrated?
It did, and leave it to you, Rufus, to pick up on something that I thought was fascinating that not a single person has asked me about it. Chess research. Yes. I had not looked into the chess data specifically. I've been reading a lot about, nature versus nurture, and the fact that everybody has hidden potential, and we've all talked about deliberate practice at one point or another. What I did not realize was that essentially, even in a brain power rich game like chess, that intelligence basically gives you an advantage if you're a novice or you're a kid. You can learn the rules faster, you can memorize moves more quickly, you might have them at your fingertips more, you can see the pattern on the board more rapidly, but that over time, that can only get you so far. And that what ultimately allows people to achieve greater things in chess, and this is true in life as well, is having character skills, not just cognitive skills. Character skills are what motivate you to keep studying, to keep imagining different endgames for different beginnings, to anticipate what your opponent might do, and then have a series of possible counterattacks and defenses ready. And I don't think that we spend enough time talking about character skills. When we talk about character, we think about it as virtue. We assume that being a person of character is about being good and being decent and being noble. But I've really shifted my thinking on this, and the chess research was part of this, to say, character is not just will, it's skill. It's being able to put your principles into practice. So it's one thing to be disciplined and determined and proactive when things are going well. It's another thing to stand by those values on a hard day. That is as much about a set of learned capabilities as it is about innate talent.
I love that that's something you changed your mind on, and it just popped in my head as you were speaking that I want to start keeping a diary of everything I changed my mind on, right? Because this is kind of, these are interesting moments for all of us. it's not just your former self who thought that the character is something we develop through force of will. Aristotle, you say in the book, described character as, quote, a set of principles that people acquired and enacted through sheer force of will. Now you see character more as a set of skills. So you appear to be correcting Aristotle.
That's a dangerous enterprise. I do not want to pick any fights with the great ancient Greek philosophers. Look, I think part of the value of social science, and one of the reasons I love my field of organizational psychology, is we can test the ideas that philosophers develop with data. And through experiments and longitudinal studies, and ideally, a whole series of careful replications that then we can accumulate in a meta-analysis and study of studies, where we can land is at a refinement of the ideas that philosophers gave us. And so I don't want to subtract the will component, I want to add the skill component. So when the Aristotelian view tells you that excellence is a habit, I want to say, sure, it can become a habit, but it's not just a will-do habit, it's a can-do habit, and there's know-how that's often missing, and we need to fill in those gaps to help people build a habit. And I haven't had a lot of conversations with Aristotle, but I don't think he would object to that.
No, I don't think he would. I think he probably would have applauded the clever study that Raj Chetty did using data from 79 schools in Tennessee that you kind of put forth as one of the pieces of evidence that character turns out to be really this critical component to what we all need to get ahead. Do you want to share that study?
Yeah, this is a remarkable study by a world-class economist. So what Chetty does is he takes data from this project that was designed to investigate the effects of classroom size on learning. But what Raj realizes is that because kids have essentially in Tennessee been randomly assigned to classrooms, it's a chance to look at the effect of early teachers on later success. And the stunning result that first captured my attention is that you can predict your income in your 20s from how many years of experience your kindergarten teacher had. What?
Yeah.
How could that be?
Right. Astonishing.
What is going on here? And there are many econometric controls in this study. It's as sophisticated and rigorous as they come. So I read this research and I thought, what is going on here? What are the experienced kindergarten teachers doing? And the intuitive answer is they are giving these kids an early advantage in cognitive skills. They're teaching them the basics of math and reading, and those skills are going to serve them well in life. And it is true that the more experienced kindergarten teachers gave kids an edge in math and reading. But guess what? Over the next year or so, their peers caught up. Where the lasting edge existed was not in cognitive skills, it was in character skills. If you had a more experienced kindergarten teacher, in 4th and 8th grade, your new teacher was still rating you higher in your tendency to be disciplined, determined, pro-social, and proactive. And I think the skills we learned in kindergarten about how to pursue our goals, about how to avoid procrastination, about how to learn in the face of obstacles, about how to make a group more than the sum of its parts, they actually carry with us over time, and they ultimately elevate us to greater heights. And I thought that was a stunning demonstration for the power of character skills. If you look at the data, 4th grade character skills mattered almost 2.5 times as much as 4th grade cognitive skills in predicting later income.
It's astonishing. Yeah, so these 4 characteristics: proactive, pro-social, disciplined, and determined. I showed this to my older son, who said, yeah, I think I'm definitely proactive and pro-social, not totally sure about discipline and determined. We're working on that. But honesty is another strength. But this seems really relevant information as well for parents, right? And I'm always torn on, we had Seth Stevens-Davidovitz on the show talking about big data and all the evidence that parents just don't matter that much, not nearly as much as we think we do, not as much as community and other factors. But these do also strike me as things that kids maybe learn at home. How do you feel about that piece?
Well, I think I'm always torn on this because I think we do tend to exaggerate the influence of parents. We have to think about peers and community factors, but also behavioral genetics have made it very clear that a lot of what we think is nurture is actually nature when it comes to personality, for example. Right. Like you think that your parents taught you to be a certain way, you forget that you inherited their genes. Most traits are at least 40% heritable. That leaves a lot of room for nurture to still have an influence. And what nature tends to shape is our tendency. It's not our destiny. And I think this is where parents have a big role to play. So what we know from the research on parents nurturing character skills is the way that you talk to kids matters. There's some evidence, for example, that even a preschooler, if instead of praising them for helping, if you praise them for being a helper, they're more likely to be pro-social again.
Yes.
Because they start to pick up the identity a little bit and say, well, that's who I am. I am the kind of person who helps. As opposed to, well, that was just a thing I did. And this kind of dialogue seems to be most important around, in the US at least, around ages 8 to 10, which is when a lot of kids are starting to form a sense of identity. So if your kids are older, it's too late. No, it's not too late. It's just, just a little bit more of an involved conversation, and they may need to talk themselves into it. But that, I think, is an opportunity for parents, which is one of the things that my wife Allison taught me is I thought it was really important. So we wanted to teach our kids to be pro-social. And pro-social skills come up later in the book as I'm talking about bringing out the collective potential in a team or a group.
Yeah.
But the way that I wanted to encourage our kids to be pro-social was, instead of just asking them about their own achievements, like, what grade did you get on the test? How many goals did you score in the soccer game? I wanted us to ask, who did you help this week? And we started making that a weekly dinner table conversation. And Allison said, well, why don't we also ask our kids who helped them? And I didn't get it at first, Rufus. I was like, no, I want our kids to be givers. I don't want to know what they got. And she explained it to me, and it was genius. She said, I want them to pay attention to who the helpers are. I want them to look at who are the pro-social kids. Actually, she didn't say that because people don't normally use the term pro-social. But I do. No, she said, I want them to pay attention to who's kind.
Yeah.
And sure enough, when you ask your kids, who helped you this week, instead of just focusing on what kids are cool or who's hot, right, they start to pay attention to who cares. And I think, that if your kids are older especially, to ask not who's popular, but who's kind, I think that's a great way to get them reflecting on, well, what does it mean to me to be pro-social, and why is that important to me? And you can do that for any of these character skills.
And what's exciting here, and what I think the evidence supports, is that we can learn character skills, right? You say character is the learned capacity to live by your principles, which in the case of the 8 to 10-year-old child and even older children could involve loading the dishwasher. I'm the kind of person who loads the dishwasher. That's going to be a new
dishwasher
statement.
Loader. Yeah, I'm going to noun that one.
Yeah, right, exactly. That's going to be a new statement in our household. But so to me, this interplay between character and these kind of learned capacities we have to live by our principles and personality is interesting. And I think you would say personality is these inclinations we're born with. Character are these learned behaviors that we adopt. But is there some point at which, when learned behaviors become habitual, it becomes a natural? Is there some point at which that becomes a natural inclination and our personalities in fact change? What do you think?
Oh, this is a hot topic in personality psychology right now, and I think the jury is very much out. If you look at the research of Brent Roberts and colleagues, the evidence is very clear and compelling that people
They are trying to change their economy to a more domestically consumption-driven model. They are having some challenges post-COVID. They have huge youth unemployment challenges. They are, however, the second biggest economy on the planet, and if they don't do so well, maybe the rest of us don't do so well. And you know, you have lived and worked over there. What do you see for them?
So yeah, China is really struggling right now. They're still struggling with the consequences of these prolonged lockdowns and the pandemic, the weaker consumer confidence that stemmed from all of that, and particularly this very big government debt overhang that has to do with how they've driven their economy for a long time. And then you also have, you know, geopolitical tensions on top of that, and that seems like it's having a further chilling effect on the relationship. You're seeing more and more, you know, signs of declining foreign investment in China, Chinese people trying to move their money out of the country. So for now, the story does not look particularly bright there.
Super quick, in the half a minute we have left. How much do you think the U.S. is benefiting by inflation having come down here so much faster than it has in the rest of the developed world, most specifically in Europe?
I definitely think that is fueling spending somewhat. The GDP release that you saw out today had some signs that prices might have been a little weaker than we had anticipated, which might be fueling consumption. But we'll see, you know, where that goes from here.
Yeah, we will see where it goes from here. Anna Swanson at the New York Times. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you.
Wall Street today. Look, GDP, SHMEDP. Traders took a look at this morning's report and took no solace, let me tell you that. Tech down hard again today. Other major indices off as well. Not quite as hard, though. We'll have the details when we do the one. Domestic product, we got all the economic headlines today, here as well, actually, as it usually does. But this being a Thursday, we also got an update on the labor market, the still tight labor market, I should probably say. First-time claims for unemployment benefits came out this morning, up just a tenth, but still historically low. And that, the overall strength of the American labor market, has led to what economists have come to call labor hoarding, where companies keep workers on staff just in case. Just in case of what? Marketplace's Elizabeth Trumbull explains.
In the latest beige book, the Dallas Federal Reserve mentioned scattered reports of labor hoarding. Dan Kaplan, organizational consulting firm Korn Ferry, prefers a different term.
I would say it's strategic retention.
Strategic, because companies facing short-term slumps in revenues see that immediately cutting staff may do more harm than good.
You have the natural cost of the layoffs, the severance payments, of anything, you know, benefit, and then you have the cost of having to pay agency fees to refill a position.
Not to mention the lost revenue when business suddenly picks up and we need to hire someone like now. Economist Selchuk Aaron is with the conference board.
It wasn't that easy for many companies to hire back workers after the massive layoffs during the pandemic, right? You know, a lot of industries are still feeling the heat.
Especially sectors like food and beverage and hospitality, says Luke Perdue with payroll firm Gusto.
They're actually still the least likely to let go of their workers. In those sectors, we've seen termination rates fall the most over the past year.
Businesses are also holding on to consulting and tech talent, says economist Julia Pollack with ZipRecruiter.
And so the big consulting firms and the big banks are in many cases hanging on to their Ivy League graduate new hires who don't have that much work on their plates.
Because for firms who are looking to hire now, it's tough. Mike Steinitz is with Hunt Homework Path.
It's typical for some employer, post a job. They get a ton of applicants, but the applicants are not qualified.
And the ones that are qualified are, as they say, entertaining other options. I'm Elizabeth Trumbull from Marketplace.
because of the pandemic, one of the many, many things that happened in this economy because of the pandemic, was that undergraduate student enrollment fell by a lot. But no more. For the first time since the before times, undergrad enrollment is up. That's according to data out today from the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center, which also shows that community colleges accounted for nearly 60% of that increase, 60%, with enrollment in associate's degree and certificate programs up way more than bachelor's degrees. Marketplace's Stephanie Hughes looks at why short-term credentials are so sought after right now.
19-year-old Jerry Campbell says he's been interested in HVAC systems since high school.
Nobody wants to do a hot house, nobody wants to do a cold house. You can fix both of those problems, you'll be somebody's favorite.
So Campbell enrolled this fall in a 16th-month HVAC certificate program at a technical college in Nashville, Tennessee. It was a change. This time last fall, Campbell was studying chemistry at a public university with plans to become a doctor. But he decided he didn't want to spend that much money or time on school.
Time is everything. Get back to your butt.
Enrollment in undergraduate certificate programs like Campbell's is up nearly 10% this school year. Associate degrees are up 3.6%, but bachelor's are up less than 1%. Doug Shapiro is one of the authors of that new report from the National Student Clearinghouse.
Students are really voting with their feet for shorter term, I think less expensive credentials with more direct ties to today's workforce.
And there will be jobs waiting for these students once they're done in everything from HVAC to microchip manufacturing. Josh Weiner leads the Aspen Institute's College Excellence Program.
You see Micron coming to New York and Intel coming to Ohio, and those jobs will be coming online in the not too distant future. So we need people to manufacture those chips.
But Weiner's concerned about the lackluster growth in bachelor's degree enrollment because he says the workforce needs people with those credentials too.
We have shortages of nurses and teachers and software engineers. All of those jobs require or favor bachelor's degree holders.
Weiner says higher ed's going to need to do a better job of making sure all of these people at technical and community colleges can easily transfer their credits to four-year institutions, so they have a clear path to a bachelor's degree. I'm Stephanie Hughes, Marketplace.
As it happens, David Brancaccio and the gang on the Marketplace Morning Report have a segment and a newsletter that they call Econ Extra Credit. You should sign up. That's at marketplace.org/newsletters, and you should listen every morning to David and the gang. Check it out. Coming up.
Kind of made me laugh, or else I would cry.
Gotta stay positive somehow. First, though, let's do the numbers. Yeah, day 2 of the Wawa's mega down. The director of this program just whispered in my ear. The Dow Industrials shed 251 points today, 0.75%, ended things at 32,784. That's not the mega part. The Nasdaq down 225 points, 1.75%. We'll call that the mega part. 12,595. The S&P 500 gave up 49 points, almost 1.2% today. Ended things at 41.37. Comcast subtracted 8.4%. The telecommunications firm reported a loss of 18,000 broadband subscribers in the third quarter. Advertising revenue from its NBC Universal channels also down. AT&T slipped nearly 0.5%. T-Mobile added 1.3%. Bond prices went down. Yield on the 10-year Treasury note 4.84%. On this Thursday, you're listening to Marketplace.
The Marketplace Numbers segment is supported by Odoo, simple management software for all your business needs. Marketplace is supported by Charles Schwab. Schwab believes every investor deserves to work with a firm they can count on. That's why Schwab has financial consultants ready to serve their clients, plus professional answers and 24/7 live help. Learn more at schwab.com. And by the Peter G. Peterson Foundation, a nonpartisan organization dedicated to raising awareness and accelerating action on America's fiscal challenges to build a brighter economic future for the next generation. Learn more at pgpf.org.
Marketplace is proudly sponsored by Total Wealth Planning, a 30-year Cincinnati-based wealth advisory firm serving executives and emerging leaders through financial guidance. TWPteam.com.
The ballot in Ohio's November election is packed with important and controversial issues. WVXU can be your guide to understanding each topic, from issues 1 and 2 on abortion and marijuana to Cincinnati's proposed sale of the city-owned railroad. The WVXU news team is bringing you the facts you need to make informed decisions. Our voter guide is at wvxu.org.
Local support for our marketplace comes from Sharonville Convention Center, focused on creating exceptional event experiences. New for 2023 will be the Todd Portune Exhibit Hall with a capacity of up to 2,000 for dinner and 40,000 square feet of exhibit space. The Sharonville Convention Center is dedicated to making your events even better. More information at SharonvilleConventionCenter.com.
This is Marketplace. I'm Kai Rizdal. There is, between the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, more than $1 trillion at hand to fix and upgrade American infrastructure over the next decade or so. That money comes, though, with a catch. Buy American rules. Rules that have been around for a long while, I should say. They have been expanded now to new kinds of projects and building materials, which means state, local, and tribal governments have to be more careful that what they are spending federal money on was, in fact, made in the United States. And as Marketplace's Savannah Marr found out while she was reporting for our climate podcast, How We Survive, that is holding up some critical projects.
Outside of Saskatoon, the capital of the Gila River Indian community, a construction crew is digging a trench. Lengths of bright blue pipe, 4 feet in diameter, are piled up on the work site.
We're putting in about 250 feet a day.
David DeYoung heads up the community's irrigation project.
I'm trying to find this Hawaiian food truck. They don't say where they are here at the Jungle Gems in Fairfield. They just say Jungle Gems, so I'm assuming they're in the parking lot because it's a food truck, so just driving around. If not, I guess I'll just go shopping. This was a waste of time. disappointing.
talking to Israel, trying to slow walk a war. I think that it does indicate that some of the Israeli government is listening. They're listening very carefully to what the president has to say.
Ken?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I can't imagine Hamas agreeing to terms saying, look, please release the hostages and then we'll have the ground invasion. I mean, I don't understand why there's an incentive to release hostages. Obviously, this seems to me to be a war that both Hamas and Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, was welcoming because Netanyahu wanted to get rid of, he's not a fan of Palestinians, and he wanted to always invade Gaza to get rid of Hamas. And Hamas knows that any invasion by Israel, and it's been going on for a while, will bring condemnation around the world. So as horrific as the October 7th atrocities were by Hamas when they came into Israel and just slaughtered those people, I think Hamas still feels that public opinion, world opinion, I should say, is on their side.
Well, I do think the world opinion is on the side of the Palestinian people, and perhaps in support of Hamas. I think one critical thing here, though, is that the Hamas originally said no airstrikes or we won't release hostages, but then the airstrikes have been punishing, and some hostages have come out. And I think that's the Qataris coming in because the relationship between Qatar and Hamas has been pretty strong, and some of that has been in a three-way dialogue with Netanyahu and the Qataris and Hamas to try to undermine the Palestinian Authority, or Fatah, in the West Bank. I also think, Ken, that Netanyahu is what we might have called a generation ago, maybe, chicken hawks. He has not wanted ever to have a major ground incursion. He has been willing to deal with Hamas, which is part of the major criticism across the political spectrum in Israel against Netanyahu, that dealing with Hamas to undercut Fatah and the Palestinian Authority has been a losing strategy, and this in October 7th just demonstrates that. So I think Netanyahu is more willing to slow walk or slow roll the war, just because he's not inclined to be full into a war and all these other competing interests he has.
And I think that leads to Marianne's first question, was what kind of influence does President Biden have in this whole decision-making thing? And I think it's large. I mean, we'll talk about the Speaker of the House thing in a bit, but it was amazing split screen on our TV the past couple of weeks where you see President Biden talking about peace, talking about working things out, and expressing the horror of what Hamas did, as well as the horror of the dead Palestinians, while the Republicans can't get their act together. So I don't know if vote reform will change. I don't know if this will be an issue, 12 months from now. But I think coming out of this, again, not minimizing anything about the loss of life, coming out of this, I thought President Biden looks really professional.
You talk about the attacks on the Palestinians. What's your President Biden has said speaking out against these attacks?
This was a deal. The deal was made, and they're attacking Palestinians in places that they're entitled to be. It has to stop. They have to be held accountable.
Now, Cam, he says they have to be held accountable, but who can do that and how can they?
Okay, I didn't hear the clip, but if the issue is that Hamas is to be held accountable, and that's what the president is saying?
He's saying that the attacks on the Palestinian civilians by the Israelis have to be
Yes, so basically he's been saying all along, the Israelis have said all along, that they will adhere to the rules of war, which is a strange idea, but there are rules that countries have signed on to, first of the Geneva Conventions, which say how states operate in international and intra-state conflict, and so they're saying you shouldn't be attacking civilians, civilian infrastructure, civilian livelihoods, and civilians are to be protected in war. And all of that is made so difficult by the fact that well, even the United States, we put military facilities close to civilian populations because that's where jobs and housing is. Think of Wright Pat Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, right? So Gaza is this relatively little tiny place with lots of people, and Hamas and versus the innocent civilians, well, that's kind of hard to determine in the so-called fog of war. And so he's saying, be careful, don't strike hospitals, mosques, places that would be considered civilian protected zones.
There was a great editorial cartoon in this country that I don't know if everybody agrees with, but I thought it pretty much held true. You see an Israeli fighter and you see a Hamas fighter, and the Israeli fighter, in back of him was a baby carriage, and the Hamas fighter in front of him was a baby carriage. And I think it leads to the widespread feeling that Hamas will use Palestinians as bait. And, just like, they'll have their headquarters and their military, installations near hospitals. So I think whether it is popular in around the world, in the Arab-speaking world, I think in the United States, that cartoon pretty much hit home.
Well, I agree that.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
If I may, I agree that since Hamas has taken control of the Palestinian legislative elections, which have only happened the one time, and controlled Gaza since then, that Hamas has provoked 6 wars with Israel. And if you think about all those airstrikes that Israel is raining down on Gaza right now, the Hamas leadership is safe in those tunnels with the hostages, and they spent a whole lot of money building tunnels, and they spent no money building air shelters to protect their own people from the bombs that they bring down upon their people. So I absolutely agree, Ken.
This morning on Morning Edition, we heard desperate pleas from U.S. citizens saying their babies are waking up without milk because they're trapped in Gaza, and they're concerned the U.S. government is just not doing enough for them. Is that a fair assessment? What else can the government do for U.S. citizens trapped there? Ken?
Well, I can't imagine. I mean, I'm sure that the administration is doing whatever it can, but of course we don't have accounts of what's happening to the hostages, what condition the hostages are in. Only we've seen the accounts of those 4 hostages, as Laura mentioned, who've been released from Gaza, and they're not a pretty picture, but there are a lot of people saying, well, there are Republicans certainly saying that. Let me go back even further. Donald Trump said if the election of 2020, he really said this, if the election of 2020 weren't rigged, this wouldn't have happened. Hamas wouldn't have launched their campaign, which, it says a lot about what's going on in domestic politics. But as far as, I think Joe Biden, President Biden, is doing everything he can, and I'm sure using all the diplomatic channels. But I suspect that the information he's getting and what he can do to help Americans held behind, Gaza, in Gaza, is very limited.
Yes, there was an NPR story this morning with a Palestinian couple who are American citizens, live in Boston area, and they haven't been able to get out. But they said that when they go to the border crossing into